You are listening to Abnormal Spaces.
I'm Donnie.
I'm Ryan.
In this podcast, we discuss conceptual realities, the researchers, authors, and explorers who describe and define them, as well as our personal experiences in these abnormal spaces. In this episode, we discuss Nikolai Kosyrev, the Russian scientist who developed the Kozyrev Mirror, what it does, how it works, and what fascinating mysteries its experiments revealed. So we had talked about time travel. We started to discuss, but it didn't make it into the episode. We started to discuss this Russian scientist named Nikolai Kosyrev, or I've heard it pronounced a bunch of different ways. Doesn't matter. Anyway, this guy is fascinating. And before we even start discussing his mirrors, I think it's important to talk a little bit about how out of step with mainstream science he was. It's astounding, some of the things that he predicted but didn't have a way to prove. And I don't know if you know this or not, but he was imprisoned. Yeah, because he was too out there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he predicted was that there had been volcanoes on the moon. And everyone's like, you're crazy. And then when we finally went up there and when we analyzed the rocks, we found volcanic material. And it's been since confirmed several other times with other lunar missions that absolutely there had been volcanoes at one point on the moon. So he had this knowledge and these theories. And he, unfortunately, lived at a time that the Soviet Republic really wanted to squash dissidents. And they thought that he was subversive, and they thought his ideas were loony. But by imprisoning him, he had a lot of time to think and read and research, and found a book about the universe, and that really resonated with him. And then so he came up with some more of his theories. I thought that part was really interesting. And we've talked about other philosophers and thinkers and scientists who have been, ridiculed by the mainstream or whatever, and then later proven right. Or we can't prove them right yet, even though we believe them to probably be right or to at least have the best theory going. I wanted to start with that only because I found that super fascinating.
I don't think he ever got to do any experimental anything.
No,
right?
He never got to see the finished creation. He never got to experience the testing or anything like that. It was these two other Russian scientists that kind of picked it up and ran with it.
In the 90s,
yeah,
right?
In the 90s, yeah.
Okay, so he died in 84 or something like that.
Yeah.
So the mirrors, they call it the mirrors, I guess, because it's just shiny metal, basically. But it's really hard to explain because I tried to explain it to Sabin and I couldn't. I was just like imagine a piece of paper on its end spiraled like a snail, and it's in a Fibonacci sequence. So for those of you who don't know what the Fibonacci sequence is, it's like a natural, what would you call it?
It's a naturally occurring spiral that we see all over Earth, but it also has really interesting mathematical properties, and that's where the golden ratio comes from. I would imagine most of our listeners probably know what that is, but once you see it, then you can apply it to nearly everything, and it seems to work, whether it's, a classical work of art or a snail shell or whatever.
Yeah, you said it way better than I would have said. There's been a lot of ums and a lot of edits. Okay. Yeah, so anyways, it's just basically sheet metal twisted into a sort of snail's shape, and you enter into there, and there's like a chair in the middle of there, and they did have equipment and stuff in there to measure brain waves and a lot of contact with the subjects that were in there. But when they built this thing and they put a picture of an ancient symbol for the Trinity.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And the reports say that there was some kind of field that appeared around the mirrors, and they started seeing orbs of light and stuff inside of the lab.
Yeah.
And that's when the UFOs started appearing over the lab.
Right.
And the Northern Lights went off.
It was actually the Southern Lights. That's what's crazy. So it was the Aurora Australis.
Oh.
But it appeared in Siberia. And they're like, this isn't the aurora that we see. This is the Southern Hemisphere aurora. Why is it here? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I can't remember if there were 7 different ships, but the residents of this town, Deaxon, the residents of this town all described spaceships, seeing them. But what's interesting is there were, I think, 7 unique shapes. And so some residents only saw like a disc shape. Other residents saw this kind of like tube shape. Regardless, no one saw anything outside of whatever this group of ships were. So it was some specific fleet, or maybe from 7 different nations. I don't know, alien nations or whatever. So nearly everyone in the town saw this stuff. The other crazy thing is, before they put the symbol of the Trinity in there, whenever they first constructed it, everyone was afraid to go inside it because there was this,
fear.
This field of fear, and people couldn't even step foot in it without like being terrified. And so it took them a while to even get over that. Well, before they put the Trinity in there was already some kind of glowing or something that some of the people had reported, but not everyone reported. And then they get that Trinity symbol in there, and then spaceships show up, or some kind of, anomalous phenomena. And then they had the Aurora that showed up. So they realized they were dealing with something really powerful.
Yeah.
One other thing too, so he tried a couple different designs. One of them was almost like an MRI. It was like a tube that you lay in.
Yeah, I saw that one.
I was struck by all of the things that seers of the future or other times or other realities, like Nostradamus, he had his egg.
Yeah.
And even Da Vinci had a hexagonal device made that was mirror line. Because back then, mirrors were used in a lot of practices in ancient Greece and Rome and stuff, where they would use parabolic mirrors to start fires and as weapons and concentrate energy, etc. And likewise too. I mean, not only did Nostradamus have the egg, but he had a bowl of water that he would stare into that he called his magic mirror, if I remember right. So the same thing, you have that convex property. And I think it's interesting that Kozyrev, whether he knew it or not, he was imitating the same thing that had been done before.
Yeah, man.
By seers.
This has really sparked my interest in mirrors, period.
Yeah.
Because mirrors are crazy. If you take the time and just look at yourself in a mirror, all kinds of crazy shit happens.
Oh, yeah.
It can be anxiety inducing.
Yep.
A while back, I told Brandon to sit in front of a mirror for like 15 minutes and just look at yourself in the eyes.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, man, after about 10 minutes, I had to stop because I was getting all kinds of panicky. I was getting all kinds of anxious. He was like, stuff was disappearing. Everything was going white. And then my face started changing into, like, I could see overlays of, like, my nose would get bigger.
Yeah.
I've done that a lot, and it's funny to say, but to actually do it, you really start seeing different faces overlaid on top of your face.
Yeah. So I've done that too. And one thing that I think is really interesting is that it's a reverse image of our face. So it's not right.
Right.
But that's the face that we know. And it creeps me out that everyone else sees a different face of mine.
Dude, it creeps me out that you just said that, because literally what I was getting ready to say is there was a guy who created this thing called an infinity mirror. I think it's called an infinity mirror. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
You've seen it?
Yes.
Just 2 right angles.
Yep.
So you look in the middle of that and you see your face the way that others see your face.
Yeah.
And it just blew my mind off. And
Right.
And when you just said that, I'm just like, oh yeah, I gotta get one of them.
Yeah. But do I really want to?
Yeah.
back to Kozyrev and some of his wild theories that may or may not actually be wild. Einstein had talked about relativity and how, like black holes, there's a weight because of the density of the matter that pulls things towards it. And there's often like a rubber sheet experiment to demonstrate that. But he thought of space-time as kind of its own element, if you will, or its own thing with its own properties. And I can't remember the physicist that added on to it, but he had the idea that it twisted, because we think about things spiraling. Like when we think about universes forming and galaxies forming, we think about the rotation and we think about that spiral rotation. But what they theorized and what Kozyrev expounded upon was this whole idea of torsion and this whole like twisting of the matter of space-time. And because of that, you're going to have ripple effects. You're also going to have an enormous amount of energy that is not only needed to do the twisting, but also traveling through the twist itself. That's why the mirror, when he tried the tube and then he realized, oh, if I'm trying to tap in to this space-time, then I need to, for lack of a better term, mirror it. And so, he decided to do a spiral. His design is kind of like Fibonacci light because it's only got one full rotation in it, but that's it. It doesn't curl around into a much smaller one. But his theory was time is twisting, and therefore my device must also have a twist to it in order to function. And I think he was right. I think there's a lot of arguments to be made for the whole concept of space-time being its own thing and torsion being one of the mechanisms or one of the actions in which it perpetuates, or however you want to say that. I also think it's really cool that when people sat inside, they had to get over their initial fear. Then they would sit inside it, and oftentimes they would feel a little nauseous, a little lightheaded, kind of out of sync. And I believe that to be this kind of transitory phasing where they're starting to tune in to this other time or timeline. But one of the things that's fascinating to me about this is the United States, and specifically the CIA, was working on parapsychology and remote viewing. And once they discovered what Robert Monroe was doing, they wanted a piece of that remote viewing action. Well, so did Russia. And Russia was working on remote viewing as well. And so when the Russian government decided to pay more attention to this and use some of his work, to experiment with, it was specifically for remote viewing. One of the craziest things is they had someone stationed 1,400 miles away, and they would see if they could get the participant that's 1,400 miles away to see the same image that the person in the booth in Dixon in the chamber was thinking about. And they had pretty substantial success with this. Without doing the mirrors, it was, like 2% or maybe 8% max. I don't know. And some of that can be attributed to luck, honestly, or just, statistically, it's going to come up right every so often. But then they were like over 60%. The craziest thing is they kept doing it. And they found that children were actually better at it. And then they found specifically female children were better at it. And then they found that female children of shamans or people in indigenous groups or whatever were the best at it. Those girls could get over 90% accuracy. Wow. The other thing was, with all these images, they assigned numbers to them. And the images were kind of hieroglyphic in nature. I saw that. Yeah, so one of them in particular looks kind of like a volcano. Yeah. And they gave the girls just the number. And they drew these volcanic images.
Yeah, I saw the picture of that.
It's insane. Uh-huh. And so I'm like, okay, this confirms so much that I already think, but then it also, raises new questions, of course.
Yeah, the video I saw said something like 5,000 people were a part of this experiment.
Yeah.
And the success rate at a point was 95%.
Yeah.
Out of 5,000
right.
different people.
Yeah.
which is mind destroying
Yes.
for me. And they paid a lot of attention to the magnetosphere, and they did it at times of high solar activity. And that's when they were achieving these insane numbers, these percentages of accuracy. So, yeah, I don't know.
Well, yeah, because the theory is that the energy produced from a solar flare actually either sped up or just increased the intensity of the torsion, of the twisting.
Oh.
And that's when they're like, hey, this does this. Let's see if like a high torsion moment is better for this. And they found out it was.
Who the hell figures this shit out?
I
mean,
know.
like, for real.
Yeah.
I could sit here for 100 lifetimes and I would just never think of that.
Well, that's the thing. All of these great thinkers and theoreticists, they all use the knowledge they already have from what other scientists have come up with, but there's still that unmeasurable element of the aha, like, what about this? And no one's thought of that before. And a lot of people for a long time disregarded the ether because they were like, it's not there and you can't measure something that's not there. And what people are starting to come around to is everything has mass and everything is something and there is no nothing. Fish swim through the water, birds fly through the sky. We accept that the water is a material. We don't accept that the sky is a material, but it is. And space is full of that. And then the other thing is that we have been trying to figure out dark matter and dark energy for decades now. And it's going to be a while, probably, I think, until we get closer to understanding that. But I keep coming back to, are we not talking about kind of the same thing? It's this immeasurable thing that seems to take up the majority of the mass of the entire universe. And we have been reluctant to accept it because it's just easier to imagine that space is this vacuum and there's nothing out there except for the things that we can see and touch. And same with just the air around us. You know, we don't want to accept it for the material that it actually is. I think that people have to seem kind of loony by whatever the standards are of the day and then are proven right later. And unfortunately, it's often, you know, posthumously. Regardless, yeah, where do they come up with it? It comes through the Akashic record, maybe.
It comes through the ether.
It comes through the ether. It's true, though.
Yeah.
Or it seems that way, anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I always say, it just distills down to, if you think of the world as solid shit, then that's what you get. If you think of the world as vibration, that's what you get. It's all about how you think about it.
No, it's true. And it's the same with time because, you know, people that think of time as linear, that's the only way they're going to see it. The people that are like, there's no way time is linear. It makes less sense for it to be linear when you think about all of these other parameters and all these other factors. And so, yeah, it's the same thing. If you choose to accept and work within these certain confines, then that's what you're going to see. That's all you're going to see.
And that goes for everything.
That goes for everything.
Right.
talk a lot about vibration and energy, and what we can definitely tell from Kozyrev's work and the work of the two scientists that have actually implemented all this and spent their entire lives proving all of this true. What I keep coming back to is things in our universe seem to spin, or they have some kind of vibrational momentum. It just makes sense to me that, of course, whatever the space-time stuff is, it would also twist, because something has to start that twisting motion to begin with. Something has to start that vibration to begin with. Imagine a river. If it is just a current that naturally occurs, that starts the vibrations, that starts the twisting and the spinning, that's a thing that we need to figure out. Because I think that will help in more ways than just traveling through time, which I think is neat and fun thought experiment. But at the end of the day, I'm not as concerned with that as I am with the force that does it and what that force means. And also, so many things in our universe are predicated on some amount of randomness, some amount of chaos. And I don't think that things would exist the way we understand them if there weren't some kind of randomness and weren't some kind of chaos. And I realize that I am biased to this because of my corporal being. I just, I believe in the randomness because I want to, I guess. But would there not be storms? And what I mean by that is like a time storm, for example. Back to the river analogy, it's flowing one direction. You throw a big, big rock in it, it's going to create ripples. They're going to dissipate. They're not going to affect the entire river, but they're going to affect that section of the river. So if we have this time-space torsion, twisting river concept, and then something gets plucked into it or something explodes or whatever, then that is going to send out some ripples. The current may change for a little bit, etc. So if that happens anywhere in the universe, most likely it would somehow affect us, even to a very unmeasurable degree. But it could happen. If that's the case, then why wouldn't things like deja vu, weird memories, just weird things happening in the course of a day or a month or a year, could those also not be caused by something like that affecting the time-space river that we don't even know how to measure or access or manipulate? That'll always be the next thing. Once they figure that out, then they're like, how do we manipulate this to our benefit?
Yeah, totally.
Which, that's what humans do. And, but I am fascinated with that. And I'm fascinated with the fact that we have an individual and then other individuals who came up with this, worked tirelessly on it, and the general public has no idea. We're still not much closer that we know of any kind of time manipulation, or at least, understanding it better. I guess we're somewhat closer, but it still seems so far off because it seems like such a big thing.
Well, also like all of the suppression. It's like clubs. It's like fraternities.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're not part of the fraternity, then fuck off.
Yeah.
And that isn't science.
No, not at all. Well, it's like the guy who theorized plate tectonics was a balloonist. And at one point in time, it was like every other man was a scientist of some kind.
Yeah.
Which is beautiful. But anyway, so he's this balloonist. It's before, I think World War I. And he, wrote this paper and everyone's like, you're a balloonist. You're not a geologist. You don't know anything about. And he's like, no, I've been up in the sky a whole bunch. I've looked at this. This makes sense to me. 50 years. And I'm coming back to, if someone would have said, maybe there's something to this, they would have put aside the fact that he was a balloonist or thought, hey, he's got a different perspective than we have. Let's listen to it. We could have been 50 years earlier on understanding plate tectonics, which means understanding volcanoes, earthquakes, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that's another one. Speaking of earthquakes, I'm going to get his name wrong, but it was like Tomarov or Tomakov or something like that. He's one of the 90s Russian scientists that has been working on this stuff. He used the mirror to predict earthquakes
Oh, yeah.
And he had like a crazy high percentage of getting them right. This is like 2016 or something. Like, they're still working on this, which is great.
Yeah.
And again, mainstream science would be like, oh, you're in a spiral mirror. What do you know?
Yeah, totally. I hate to bounce around, but when I watch that Terrence Howard stuff, even though it sounds insane, but if you really pay attention to it, it doesn't sound any more insane than anything else.
No, I mean, some of it is his delivery, and
it's the delivery.
Yeah.
Right.
And some of it's just so out there that it just seems impossible. But the other side of it, like, okay, we look at the periodic table of elements that Mendeleev came up with. It's mostly based on atomic weight and other things, but that's one person's visualization of it.
Right.
And focused on certain things. Terrence Howard, completely different visualization of the elements, and basically not even a periodic table at that point. More like these families that work together, kind of. Also, a bit of a spiral to that shape. But anyway, to me, it's not crazy because, one, there's little that you can call settled science, because that's the whole point, is to continue refining and improving and testing and trying to replicate. The other thing is, I don't see why these both can't be utilized, why they don't both make sense. I don't think that one is necessarily negating the other, or one's even arguing with the other. I think that you need to look at things from multiple perspectives to have a decent understanding of it. And yeah, it gets more confusing that way, but the universe is confusing. And we just got these little human brains. So, like, there's only so much that we're going to get.
That's right. So
we should look at it as many different ways as possible. And yeah, I mean, sure, there are people who have been plenty wrong. Lots of, there's a dumpster full of history's dumb ideas. That doesn't mean that there weren't good ideas in there, or there weren't ideas that weren't fully developed yet and maybe were released before they were fully understood. And so I'm like, let's listen to these other ideas. There's got to be some merit to that,
Yeah, totally, man.
And a person can have 10 bad ideas and one really great idea, and we can't say, well, this guy, his other 10 ideas were stupid. Why listen to this one? That's what we do because we are heuristic in nature. The way humans navigate the world is they have this set of beliefs, and then they base all the new interactions on those set of beliefs. And so, yeah, it's like, okay, well, this guy had 10 dumb ideas. Why should I listen to another one? Well, because that might be the one. And just because currently there's not a way to understand it the way this person is understanding it, doesn't mean that that's not the way it is.
Yeah, man. He's just thinking of it as vibration.
Right.
And the traditional way is solid.
Right.
Like you said, they don't fight each other.
Right.
They both work. It just makes sense. Like he was talking about the color and the resonance in hertz of color.
Right.
And I mean, it's all the stuff we've talked about.
Yeah.
It's all the stuff that everybody has done.
Right.
So it's just vibration. It's almost like you just have to go back to Tesla. If you want to know everything, it's frequency and vibration, basically.
Yeah.
I can't go back to solids.
Right.
My mind doesn't perceive things as it does in a way, like when I'm doing mundane things, but when I'm in a state of contemplation, which is way more now than before, I just find myself staring into the air. Some people could say it's concerning, because, because you look like a crazy person,
Right.
think about like in the 90s when these guys were doing these experiments. The internet was just nothing.
Right.
The communication was nothing. We remember that stuff. And to do all these experiments with all these people, it's crazy. The chances of being able to fake it. And why would you fake it if that was your whole life's work, is to study these mirrors?
Right.
So it's like now, you get on YouTube and you type in Kozyrev Mirrors, and it really irks me because it's like, 90% of it is just bullshit.
Yeah.
Like people just doing these weird little shows with sidekicks and, I'm just like, like what? I was watching the Russian stuff with the subtitles, and there was only a few.
Right. Yeah. Well, they want to keep it secret. So I went to the CIA.gov, to the reading room, the Freedom of Information Act reading room, and I was trying to find stuff on it. And there's lots of mentions of Kozyrev. Apparently, I don't know if that's a common last name in Russia, but he was Nikolai. There's another Kozyrev that was prominent in the 60s. I can't remember what the initials were, but there was no N.
I feel like I saw that.
It was like BP or something like that. But anyway, some of the things he was interested in were very similar. But regardless, so the CIA is on it. They know that there are these experiments being done, and they are carrying out their own experiments. We can find some of the Russian stuff. We can't find much of the American stuff. But at any rate, these things were happening. There is definitely legitimacy to it. We would never know. But as you said, we're now in kind of a information sharing point in time where, anyone can have any kind of platform and say anything.
It's too much.
Right now it is too. It's like any other new development,
Right.
But yeah, you're right. I mean, we're definitely more fragmented, or at least it feels like we're a little more fragmented than we were, but only because people can self-identify and put themselves into these little silos with other like-minded people. What sometimes gets lost in that, though, is we all contain multitudes, and most of us want to be in multiple silos at the same time. So it's, it feels so fragmented, but I also think that that's because it's easier to fragment ourselves, although I don't think we're that fragmented. But superficially, yeah, that's how it looks,
Yeah, it's like strengthening the sense of individuality to a hyper realistic point. Almost like it's working negatively in a way, because now everybody can express themselves, and we've never been able to look at ourselves this way before. So now there's all these different ideas. I mean, it's like every single second almost. I can't keep up with it at all. It's so fast for me. It gives me anxiety.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh man.
Yeah, it's drinking from a fire hydrant for sure, and it's a lot to take on and a lot to process, and that's what happens. We get fatigued and we can't process the majority of it, and that's just the way our brains work. But I think the whole mirror thing is so cool, and they tried a lot of different materials and settled on that shiny aluminum as the most conductive one. Going back to the discussion about looking at yourself in the mirror, I think it's so interesting that it was a reflective material that worked the best, and it is somewhat mirror-like. We really are looking in to look through, if that makes any sense. And I think the one story about the guy who ended up seeing himself as a small child, and then the kid, he realizes him, the kid turns around and says, "Who are you?" Right. And that's when he snaps out of it.
Yeah.
And what is really fascinating to me is, I think that our concept of time travel, like we talked about in the other episode, I think our concept of time travel is a little skewed because it's a hard thing to understand, especially if you aren't first coming from the, hey, this is all happening at once. It's nonlinear. But he didn't have a memory of that happening as a child. And he still doesn't have a memory of that happening. So we worry about, if we were to travel through time, we might change something that will forever alter everything. While I believe that could be possible, I think stuff like this is more likely. It happened in real time. He actually did see himself in real time as a child. We don't understand how you can be in two places at once, in two bodies at once. We barely understand how memories work. We know a lot more about it now. We can actually, chart the regions of the brain and how memories are made and how they're recalled, etc. But what we don't know is, could you create a memory yourself in yourself? And I'm thinking apparently no. Apparently no. Because what would have happened with conventional thinking of how time works is that experience would have happened. He would have said, "Who are you?" He would have snapped out of it. And then he would have been like, "Oh, I remember walking through that park and then having that weird entity behind me." But that didn't happen. And so I really think that, that our understanding of time is still very limited, and our understanding of our place within the particular vibration of the particular timeline that we happen to be tuned into, I think that that is somewhat misunderstood. Is there a chance that the timeline that he went to is a separate timeline, and that boy in that timeline does remember this and carries that throughout his life? Possibly. That's a very good possibility.
I would say totally, because if we're just going off of the everything is now, all possibilities are now, and everything that has ever happened or will happen is now, then totally. I mean, why not?
Right.
If I want to walk straight and then I could walk 360 degrees in theory, like imagine all those degrees, I would have walked that way.
Right.
According to this theory.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so much more. It's even more than that. But the one that matters is this.
Right.
So whenever he saw that, that was this. It has nothing to do with time, I don't think. We call it time. I mean, you could call it anything, I guess. But it's not a static thing. It's not like, time.
Right. Because nothing is actually set. I think that's the other thing. We think of time as these fixed points, and we think that,
Right.
we go to this a particular time in the past and it's going to look just like this, and we go to this point in the future and it's going to look like this or whatever. And that's not it. There are no fixed points.
If I'm upstairs, I think about my studio and I'm like, oh yeah, I get a picture of it. And that's not my studio.
Right.
That's a picture of it happening now. And then I walk down to the studio and we neglect all of the little things that have to happen to get down to the studio until you perceive what your mind puts together as the studio. The mind thinks it's a fixed thing, like it's always here. But it's not, to me.
Right.
Yes, we can say it's always here. Obviously, duh, like this house isn't, like we're not disappearing and blah, blah, blah. But on direct experience, we are disappearing.
Right.
So to ourselves, which is the only truth, we're going to get out there for a minute, but to ourselves, the only direct truth is to yourself.
Right.
And so I think that we need to pay attention to that much more than we do. Everything else is an idea.
Right.
And even theories that may or may not work, if you start looking at the world for yourself in these different types of ways, it really gets weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's safer to just go with the, constructs that you've been given.
Mm-hmm.
That's why those constructs exist. It just makes life a little easier for a lot of people.
That's right.
It's like having guardrails on the universe, little baby bumpers.
There are no rails.
Right. And that's terrifying to a lot of people.
That's terrifying to me.
Yeah. With me, I love it. I'm so glad there are no rails, and I'm so glad that not only does nothing exist, but everything exists and it's all within me. And I realize, that sounds egocentric or insane, and that's fine. I keep coming back to that my personal reality is my reality, and that's the only one I'm going to know. So I have to work within that reality that I know, and I can't be so concerned with others' realities that they know. We're all on a personal, I don't really want to say journey, but
yeah, but the others and the you, there are no others.
Right, yeah.
It almost sucks to keep distilling it down, but it's amazing that there's this mirror that somebody came up with, and whoever's sitting in the middle of it, the environment is more favorable for conditions of higher vibration or different vibration.
Yeah.
And anyone who's ever went to sleep, which is every single person, has probably had the sense of falling.
Yep.
And you getting up, right?
Yep.
That's exactly what's happening in that mirror.
Yes.
It's no different than going to sleep. It's no different than having an astral projection, a trance. It's no different than any of that stuff. And of course, if you're sitting in this space where you're conscious of one vibratory level, which we call 3 dimensions, and this space is vibrating a higher vibratory level, they're not commingling because the lower is going higher because the higher's there.
Right.
And it's stronger, Yeah. It's going to go toward the high.
Right.
Then you're going to feel nausea. You're going to feel dizziness. You're going to feel fear.
Yeah.
Because everything is being disintegrated right in front of your face.
Yes. Yeah, and it's discordant. It feels disharmonious for a time until the vibrations match. And so, yeah, of course you're going to feel unsettled.
I've had dizziness and nausea feelings. It's like, getting too wasted and you're doing flips, it's like that. And I think even back in the early times, the Sufis used to whirl. They used to twirl.
Yeah.
And that physical spinning, like when you were a kid and you would just spin in circles and then you would stand there. You couldn't stand there. Actually, what's happening is, they're obviously going to say like your equilibrium's off, and that's true. But what's also true is you have, quote, physically altered your vibration. Your next body, or whatever they call the etheric body, that one is moving as you stand still. The 3D body stands still. The body where your consciousness is half in is moving around and around and around, and it makes this physical body sick. Yeah. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And that's 2 places at once.
Yeah, that is the beginning of separating your consciousness from your 3D body.
I recommend, nobody's going to do this, but I recommend doing that and pay attention to it, even if you just do a little bit of it. Because you can see the simultaneous existence of your consciousness.
Right, yeah. And the other thing is, why is it spinning in a circle? Because that's vibration. Because
spiral. Yeah.
It is the twisting of the universe.
Yep.
That's the way it is.
That makes so much sense. Everybody's schizophrenic, because they listen to this thing that just goes like, I don't know, should I do this? I don't know. Do I need to do this? I'm tired. I'm hungry. I like this. I love this. I hate it. Like always in the background or in the foreground.
Yeah.
But it's always there, and that's why we're crazy.
Yeah.
Bye.